one of them branched off and created a big groove in the landscape. And that's what you're driving through right now, this huge valley. It's about a mile from one side to the other. A bit hard to imagine that being created by an under ice river, but it was. It's called a tunnel valley. And so you're just now starting to come up out of the tunnel valley. I first drove down this road in the sort of early summer of 1990 with my supervisor at the Morton Arboretum, Craig Johnson. And they had just finished the restoration of Lost Valley Marsh, which was that huge wetland you just drove through. And this is, we turn north now and we're heading through the entrance drive into Lost Valley Visitor Center. The center was opened in 2010. It was previously, this was an in-holding. It was owned by a high-tech firm. It was a sort of private conference center for them. Before that, it was a part of Northern Pump Farms and a hangout for Hollywood types who came to the Hunt Club there with, and that was for decades prior to the 1960s. So the visitor center is open since 2010. We just put in a new visitor center exhibit there, so you should come and visit us at the park. Whoops. This is Glacial Park. It's about 3,500 acres. About 5 miles to the north is Richmond. About 6 miles to the south is McHenry. And Route 31 connects those two, and it really cuts through the eastern part of Glacial Park. The main entrance of Harts Road is right off of Route 31, so it's a pretty easy place to find. This is Route 31. It sort of shows up as a small road, but it's actually a major road here. And this is an old railroad right of way, now the Prairie Trail. And so you turn on Harts Road. This is that huge valley you just crossed. We drove across right here, and we've turned into the entrance road and then down into this parking area here for Lost Valley Visitor Center. When you come to the park, you're visiting for the first time, you'll park in this upper lot and walk in, and you'll enter the visitor center right here through the double doors. Always a friendly receptionist there, and we have a brand new, rather costly exhibit. We got a state grant to do that exhibit, so that's a must-see if you come to the park. What we're going to do now, I'm going to do this several times, is going to show you the park. We're going to be standing right here. This is a lower parking area, so this drive slopes steeply downward. We're going to stand right at the edge there, and we're looking northwest, and we'll pan to due north. And as we do that, you'll see this is a restored wetland here in the sort of the floodplain of Nippersink Creek, which you really can't see, but it runs this way and then turns east and runs right along the tree line over a mile north. And we've restored, I'll talk more about restoration later in the program, but we take restoration very seriously. In fact, 3 of the landforms you're looking at right here are stored. This was mined all the way to the ground in the 1950s, as was this one. And this one was about half mined to the ground, and they were rebuilt when we did the restoration work on Nippersink Creek, which I'll talk about a little later in the presentation. So we've restored more than just prairies. We've restored landforms and woodlands and streams and wetlands all over the park. It's really a restoration park. And this is the answer to the question of why they call it Lost Valley. This isn't a cutesy name, invented by a developer for a new housing development. This name goes back to the 19th century. And the reason for that name is that this is a glacial moraine, sort of on the east. You were driving off of this down into the park, down into the valley, as we went this way on Harts Road. And then we rode up on this glacial landform here, which is a sort of complex of morainal topography and kettles and cames, various steepnesses and relief. But this highland here was surrounded by the Nippersink Valley, a low, wet, marshy area, particularly prior to European settlement in the early days of the 19th century, before there was much land drainage. And again, on this side, this wetland we drove across coming in was all wetland. Neither one of these roads existed until the late 20th century. And so the only access to this area was from a small road coming in from the due south on Barnard Mill Road, a small lane. It's still there today, though it's gated off. So that's why it was called Lost Valley, just very hard to get to. It's sort of nice to have someplace hard to get to in Northern Illinois. Now we're going to just take a little look at the trail. This is right next to the visitor center, which would be to our right. And we're just going to walk for a little ways on this trail. This is, you see a white oak there on your left. Another white oak here. Most of the trees down here in the bottom of this is really a closed depression. It doesn't look much like a kettle hole to most people, but it's a closed depression. It's uphill in every direction. And in those sorts of landforms in Glacial Park, you get a clay and silty soil that weathers to an acid soil profile, and that's really what white oaks love. And so we have a whole population of white oaks here. And as we come up out of that depression up onto the gravelly soil up above, just about 100 meters further, it's all bur oak because bur oak loves those gravelly ridges. See, looking off there, about 90% of the trees are bur oaks. And you see, we burned here just a few weeks before this photograph. The Mayaples have punched through like little umbrellas popping up. But not much in the way. We don't have a very rich spring flora here. Part of it was the grazing history, but right here is the old Weidrich farm, and this wasn't grazed as hard as other places. In fact, this was, according to the Public Land Survey, a really open, barrens landscape, a few small oak trees widely scattered and mostly grasses in here. So it's more woodland nature today, even though it looks very open to your eye, is probably more densely populated by trees of larger sizes than it was a couple of hundred years ago, which probably explains a lack of a really large number of spring ephemeral wildflowers in here. And we're just a little bit further, we're on a little nature trail, and we're climbing back up on the same gravel ridge again, just a little bit further down. And as you look ahead, in the direction I'm walking, there's a hill right here in the background. If you've been to Glacial Park, you've probably climbed up on the big glacial came, and that's straight ahead. It's really the same landform. It formed right along the edge of the glacial tunnel valley to our right. It's hard to imagine this was a gravel bar, but it was, because it was a stream larger than any you can imagine today. Whoops, here we go. Now we're headed up the glacial came now. It's as steep as it looks. You're probably about 60 feet above Nippersink Creek right now. It's about another 40 feet to the top. The top of the big came is about 100 feet above the Nippersink Valley. It's one of the most beautiful views in the Chicago area. I've always thought so. I first came here and first stood on top of this came in the summer of 1990, as I said, when my supervisor, Craig Johnson, brought me here. I'm not going to talk much about birds tonight, but I couldn't, the sandhills just did me a little favor there. So now you're looking across the valley of Nippersink Creek here. And so this is the tunnel valley. Water was flowing out from under this glacier. At least tens of thousands of times more water than flows in Nippersink Creek today. Plus, it's flowing in the opposite direction. Nippersink Creek flows east and then north through the valley, and then east to the chain of lakes. So this is probably 3/4 of a mile across this huge valley, really the bottom of an old glacial tunnel valley. And as we continue to pan, we're going to start to look across the valley. That's the moraine rising on the other side. These features are, according to geologists, most recently around 18,000 years old. Looking to the north now, along that's the gravel ridge, it runs all the way to the visitor center. All that gravel is formed along the edge of the tunnel valley. And now we're looking east, all the way probably 1.5 miles to 1.75 miles to the rise of the moraine on the other side of Lost Valley. So this is one of the things I love about Glacial Park are the views. It's just the spectacular topography and the broad views, seeing the land sort of unfolding in front of you in all directions. And this is, I think it'll be the last our little touring slides here. This is just coming east from the bog along the trail, and or east from the Came along the trail. And we're going to see Glacial Park Bog to our left here in just a second. It's actually a leatherleaf bog, an acid wetland. I don't have time tonight to really talk about wetlands and wetland hydrology in Glacial Park, but this is one of the few bogs that you'll find with truly acid bogs with acid-loving vegetation in this part of Illinois. The leatherleaf bog at Moraine Hill State Park is another spectacular example. Yeah, this is leatherleaf. It has that wonderful rosy red color in the winter. It's just starting to green up now, so it's kind of has more of a brownish color at this point in time. Whoops. What I'm going to do now is sort of literally and kind of figuratively get below the surface in Glacial Park and start talking about really where the park comes from. But really think about this as a restoration park. From the 1840s up until 1971, or maybe a couple of years later, the McHenry County Conservation District is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and Glacial Park was our second property just a couple of years after the Conservation District formed. And it is step by step, starting in the 1980s, been under restoration and continues to be today. Actually, what you're seeing here is a weekend of restoration event where I invite people here. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Invite people to the park, and we do educational things and tree plantings and wetland restorations as a part of a public program. We have a talented professional staff that's been working hard on the park for 35 years. It's continuing. It's a continuing subject of work. It's never done. But I want to pause now. The last time I did a presentation, just a little bit like this, someone asked me whether nature, if you gave it enough time, would just go back to what it used to be. And my answer was, I know it's a disappointing answer, but the answer is no. And I want to talk to you about why that is and why we need to do restoration. I think this is vitally important. The project of restoration today to its continued support and its success over a very long term. So let's think about this area of prairie. Let's say this is 300 years ago. This is just a prairie, and in that prairie, we introduce a disturbance. We go back in time with a bulldozer, and we bulldoze out an acre of this prairie. It's surrounded by tens to hundreds of thousands of acres of prairie. What happens to that? Well, what happens to it is that the prairie is surrounding it on all sides, and prairie seed and prairie animals and prairie fires are moving into this disturbance continually over time. And not surprisingly, over time, what happens is it turns back into a prairie, probably a matter of decades. We can't go back in time to do that experiment, but it's not really going. So this didn't go back in time to what it was before. What it did is it turned into what was around it. This is vitally important to understanding the challenge of ecological restoration today. This is why in the 1980s, first volunteers and then the first professional staffs understood that just leaving the forest preserves and conservation areas alone wouldn't get them to return back to prairies and oak savannas and prairie fens and bogs. We had to do restoration work. Because today, in a modern cultural landscape, this is suburban areas, it's farms, it's cities, and all of those influences of exotic plants and animals and pollution are pouring into this fragment of nature. This could be a conservation area or a forest preserve. They're pouring into it from all sides. and slowly or rapidly transform it into an amalgam of some of the native plants that were there before. Some of them drop out, and all the exotic plants and animals that pour in from the outside. And so eventually, we haven't completed the experiment other than in a few really small natural areas. They're just about as full of invasive plants on the inside as there are on the outside, and the exchange is free going both ways. And so this is what happens to nature if you don't do anything today, not because there's anything different about nature than 400 years ago, because 400 years ago, this modern cultural landscape was a prairie, or it was an oak savanna, or an oak barrens, or a massive marsh wetland. And when you disturbed an area within that, the influences pouring in from the outside transform that disturbance back into that communities, those communities we all know and love. Today, nature tends to move in the opposite direction. It tends to move in the direction of the cultural landscape surrounding it. That's the reason why we need restoration today. This could seem like, and I think it does seem like a bummer to some people, but to me, it's not a bummer. It means that the way forward is a necessary and perpetual commitment. It means that we won't just get it right and then our grandchildren will be able just to play around and do nothing and it will just stay a beautiful park forever and ever and ever. No, it will take a perpetual commitment of generations of people to carry out the task of ecological restoration. If we want to have prairies and oak savannas and prairie fens around in 300 years, that's the bargain. It's something we can do. We're starting to do it now. We can do a better job in the future, and generations after us can do an even better job. But it's not an option. It's a necessity. Because modern nature is completely surrounded. This is Exner Marsh in the southern part of the county, which I love as an example of this because it's just housing developments on all sides of it, completely surrounded area. So this one is much like that diagram I showed you later. These influences of all the exotic plants in all those suburban lawns all the way around Exner Marsh are pouring into the natural area from all sides. And this is Glacial Park. I want to talk about where Glacial Park comes from. It comes from a farm landscape. This is 1954, so 16, 17 years before there was a park here. This is the bog. We saw that. This is Kettle Marsh. I can't really show you Kettle Marsh. This is Hart's Road coming in. And this is actually the, I think this is the entrance road here. This is at least part of the entrance road there. No Lost Valley Visitor Center in 54. Oh no, that's the old hunting lodge right there. So this is a part of Northern Pump Farms in 1954. At least most of this area is Northern Pump Farms, and you can see the park doesn't look like much of a park at all. We see some of the remnant woodlands are still here. Thoroughly grazed to the nub, just scattered oak trees and closely grazed brome grass between those oak trees. It was a thoroughly lived in, eaten up park. This is kind of where Glacial Park starts. We do have a few high quality remnants like the bog that just no one could figure out how to farm that bog. If they did, they would have. And this is Glacial Park today. So same landscape, but looks very, very different. Still surrounded by farm areas, and you can see here's the city of Wonder Lake, or the town of Wonder Lake to the southwest. Richmond, and this community is immediately to the north. Solon Mills to this side. So these are communities, suburban community to the south. So these influences are pouring into the park also. So we have the same problems of honeysuckle and buckthorn and autumn olive and Asian bittersweet and all those things that you have here in Lake County. Sometimes if you go out to little natural areas that are way out in farm country, you can escape some of that invasion simply because you're far enough away from cities. Not so in Glacial Park. We've had when they did the initial restoration in the late 1980s, they were cutting down masses of honeysuckle and buckthorn. And as a part of doing ecological restoration, you know, we have prescribed fires. This is a fire in the interior prairie in the park. This one, like the first time I heard a Henslow sparrow was right over here. It was when I was first learning birds, and I kept hearing this funny little chirp, chirp, chirp sound, and I kept wondering what that was. And I took the longest time trying to find that bird. And later I learned that was a Henslow sparrow. They really like a few years of growth and litter development in that tall grass prairie. And the prairie was done in, I think, 1980. I believe that's 1985, our very first prairie restoration. And because it was the very first prairie restoration, it's just loads and loads and loads of Indian grass and big blue stem, and just a scattering of forbs, which is pretty typical of the early prairie restorations. Not very good for most grassland nesting birds, but the Henslow sparrow and some sedge wrens will actually use that area that you're looking at right now. And we do a lot of clearing of invasive. This is invasive vegetation, honeysuckle, buckthorn. We don't pull a lot of garlic mustard. I used to do that with my interns when we had a college intern program. But this is I'm proud of. This is an event that occurred just last Sunday, and this is our very first Latina workday in McHenry County. We had 11 people from that community come out to join us near Woodstock, Illinois. And we had a wonderful time clearing some brush, did a nature walk afterward. To me, this is not only the past of ecological restoration, this is where it started with volunteer activity, with volunteers understanding that there was something to do and going out and starting to do it. It's the future of ecological restoration, of involving the public in caring for land, even though in the present, yes, a lot of the restoration work is done by professionals and big tractors. I think the future of restoration is the involvement of the population, of the people getting involved with and caring for land. And this is just one small example of it. And I think expanding the community of people that care for land is vitally important to the future of ecological restoration. This is just one example of how we might be able to expand that community of people going into the future. This is another example of people doing restoration. This is my first weekend of restoration in the fall of 2011. Before I start the little video, this is just a bunch of canary grass. You wonder why did you do a restoration in a bunch of canary grass? Well, a few years before, while I was at Northeastern, I was walking right down a trail over here with a group of graduate students, and we were doing ecological mapping in this area, looking at landforms and soils and vegetation, sort of mapping out what the pre-European settlement communities might have been. And I was on the trail and looked over here, and I saw in this sea of Indian grass and big blue stem this stand of canary grass. And I thought, well, maybe that's wetter. And so we walked over there, and I took the soil coring tool out and we cored down into it, and under about a meter of farm era sediment, because this was all farm field for over 100 years. And the cornfields poured all that sediment down into this former wetland basin and completely filled it up. And then it's covered in canary grass. But I went down through that with the auger and struck on original wetland soil at about a meter deep, around 40 inches. And I turned to the graduate students and I said, little did I know that this would come true one day. I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if they, meaning the conservation district, could restore this wetland here, how much diversity it would add to this part of the park? Well, fast forward to 2010, and I was talking with Ed Collins, and we were talking about this prospect for a very first weekend of restoration, which is a multi-day event where we invite the public out to take part in a restoration activity and educational activities. And I talked about this former wetland here, and I'm not sure I actually talked about doing it for the weekend of restoration, but Ed really locked onto it and said that's what we should do. And so we did. And so we mowed it out first, and the next thing we had to do is to hire contractors, because that's probably millions and millions of pounds of soil, and we weren't going to move that with a group of people and shovels and wheelbarrows. And so we invited, we got our wetland permits, and then we had the earth movers come out here. And this is taken with a time-lapse photograph called a plant cam. I think they still sell them. I think this was once a minute. These photographs, you're going to see the sunset, and the sun does a nice, it turns black because obviously it would burn the camera as it goes down. So that's kind of a neat. So, and then it switches to the morning again. And so the weekend of restoration is an idea. We did a few what we called restoration weekends in the early 2000s, just to see what it was like. And I thought it was sort of magic getting people out there and over multiple days working with them. You really feel a sense of community forming with people that are working together toward a task, breaking, taking a break, doing some education, eating together, coming back, doing more work, doing more education, sitting around a campfire together. You really form a community of people, and it's really just one of the richest experience I've ever experienced as a teacher. And here you see the backhoe, the big backhoe firm we had come in here to do this work for us, and slowly re-excavating that basin. Now, I had done the surveys and soil course, so I knew how deep I wanted it. And the little figure on the right sort of looks like in white is me jumping in and out with a level rod, checking the depth of the wetland to see that we've got it at the right depth as they do their digging. It's been a while since I watched this video. It's fascinating. So this is all that canary grass has now been mined away, and we mined down about a meter deep in the center and more shallowly at the edges. And this is the event itself. And this is going to look like an old-fashioned black and white movie in color here, because it's very sort of much stop action. But these are the people as they were working. Now, this would have been starting on Saturday morning. The first thing we were doing here was raking the surface because it was a bit rough after disking. And then we were starting to plant wetland plugs in here. The soil was really quite dry. We had to water them as we put them in. You can see the threatening clouds all week. The weather predictions for this weekend were miserable. It was 80% chance of severe thunderstorms, and I was not sleeping at night and worrying about this. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? If it rains, and you can see these clouds just rolling overhead, and it's not raining. It's not raining. And so people are going to come back for the afternoon here, and what they're doing now is they're seeding, scattering seed, and then scattering straw on top of that. And we ended up calling this Turtle Marsh, and there's a story behind that. On the very last day on Sunday morning, I think we'll see that in just a second. On Sunday morning when we went out there was a little snapping turtle that came out of the bog, which is immediately to the right of us, and then crawled up and down into what was really a dry basin of what would become a marsh. It's completely dry, and so we picked the turtle up and took him back after admiring him for a while, and so it got its name, Turtle Marsh. And this is the next morning, so by now we've had our campfire, we've had a number of meals together, we've had educational events. Right before we came out, we had a session where we just did shared readings and poetry and prose. I mean, it's just a very rich weekend, getting to know people, talking about restoration, talking about their commitment to it, and yeah, it's just a wonderful, wonderful time. And this is Turtle Marsh today. We're looking sort of south here, and north at this point. And the event I just showed you, it was bone dry, and that night, threatening rain all through the weekend. That night, the skies opened up and it rained buckets. And I was lying in bed at home in Libertyville here, and just listening to this rain pounding on the roof of the house. And it was all sort of a surreal experience after that weekend. And so the next morning, the first thing I did, we had a staff meeting that morning. So I quickly got there early and ran out. I had to see whether there was water in the wetland. And sure enough, I walked right over into this area. And I looked down and there was a little puddle of water for the first time in probably a century in the middle of Turtle Marsh. And that was, I'll be honest with you, there were tears in my eyes. That was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever had in ecological restoration. Not just the restoration, it was the combination of people and the event and all the commitment from the people that were involved in it that really made the event. And I really believe that the future of restoration is about people and about getting people involved in it. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the restoration of Nippersink Creek. We've done a lot of stream restoration, really, and this started before I joined the Conservation District. I mean, the Conservation District is one of the national leaders in stream restoration. They don't blow their own horn much about this, but some of the work that they started back in the year 2000 was really the largest scale stream restoration work of its kind, or one of the largest projects in the country. I know the Kissimmee River in Florida had been on the books for a while, but it was more than on the books in McHenry County. They did the work in 2000. So this is some of this footage comes from one of my Tom talks we did on Nippersink Creek and stream restoration. It was nice and calm that day, so you can actually hear the birds in the background. Most of the other footage, it was so windy, I had to mute the sound on it. So let's this is if any of you like canoeing and kayaking and you haven't been to Glacial Park and Nippersink Creek, you've missed out on one of the nicest experiences in the Chicago area. You put in your canoe or kayak here at Keystone Landing. This is off of Keystone Road here. You canoe through the park, beautiful meandering stream all the way over to Pioneer Landing. That's an easy half-day trip. You can float it in probably 4 hours, depending on the water velocity, or you can paddle and make it more quickly. But it's just a beautiful, just a wonderful canoeing experience. I keep saying canoe. I hardly ever see canoes anymore. Kayaks are almost universal, but just a beautiful kayaking experience in Northeastern Illinois. And this is the restoration of Nippersink Creek. This is what was done in 2000. This is Nippersink Creek in 1954, and you can see this meander bend here was cut off. There were other meander bends below this photograph that were cut off, but north of, we'll call this Valley Road. We'll be referring to that here in just a minute. This is where Lost Valley Visitor Center is today, right here. Nippersink Creek by 1954 and its meandering course is gone. This is the old meandering channel of Nippersink Creek, completely dry by this time. This cane is gone. That's just a gravel spot on the earth. This is just a little part of one cane that's left. So this is after the channelization of Nippersink Creek in 1954. So this is what the Conservation District took on. About 2 mile in stream, 2 miles of channel. And this is a huge project for a conservation district and a natural resource management staff that probably totaled about 8 people at the time. Obviously put on a lot of CESLs and hired some extra people for this task, but this is just a monumental project to have been taken on by a staff of that size. Again, this is before I worked with the Conservation District. And this is, and we've done research along the stream. This is what I was doing or starting to do in 2000, 2001. I was still with Northeastern Illinois University and had a grant from Chicago Wilderness, and have continued to look at how the stream has changed over time. This is what this cross section looked like only less than a year after the water started flowing through the channel. 7 years later, it was right here. And 15 years later, it had gone out to here. So the stream is wanting a little bit bigger channel, and it's starting open up that channel for greater ease of water flow. So we've continued to study the evolution of Nippersink Creek to learn more about stream restoration ever since we did that first restoration project. And here we are going down the stream on that day. Let me stop it just for a second. Now, some of the voices in this part of the presentation are probably not as loud as my voice speaking right now. So if you have headphones or can turn up the volume, depends. Some people have more problem with this than others. I haven't figured it out yet, but the volume, I can't turn the volume up on the video any louder. So this is the plight of all streams in our landscape today. This Nippersink Creek is just a very typical Midwestern stream. The landscape releases water many times faster than it did in the past because the landscape is systematically tile drained for agriculture. Areas that are developed for housing are even more intensively drained. We have impermeable surfaces in parking lots and roads and the roofs of buildings. And it just means that water, when it falls out of the sky, hits the surface and very rapidly gets into a stream. And so even though rainfall is probably not that different than it was 500 years ago in terms of the gross amount of rainfall in a year, we have tens of times more water pouring through the stream after a heavy rain because it all gets to the stream sometimes within minutes to hours or a few days, as opposed to weeks if it falls on a porous prairie oak savanna landscape and moves into the ground and migrates through the soil to a stream. I mean, it's just many orders of magnitude difference in how quickly the water gets to the stream, and so the erosive force of the stream as it moves down, in this case, toward the chain of lakes.
Tom, maybe you can explain what you're saying because it really isn't coming through, I don't think.
Okay. Okay, this is I'm sorry. I worked with someone earlier today and they said they could hear it. So this is a problem I haven't been able to solve yet. So where we are is right at the start of right where this arrow is, and it's see if I can. We're right here, and we are it's going to be hard to do. Sorry. But what I'll do is I'll just try to talk over myself as I do this because I can't really play this. So we're going under the Bridget Valley Road, and we're going to be going down this meandering channel here. Oh, I'm sorry. trying to. Okay, I can't get to the figure I wanted to get to. So we're in this stream right here. This is the meandering path of Nippersink Creek we're going to follow as we go through the stream. How about that sound? Do you hear that sound?
I don't.
Okay. This is okay, I'll just turn the sound off. So we're in the valley of Nippersink Creek, and what we're looking at here is a lake sediment. This is a glacial lake sediment. The Nippersink Creek Valley was a shallow lake shortly after the glaciers retreated from Glacial Park, and this gray material here is just like modeling clay. You can watch as I squeeze it in my hands. It's just like the modeling clay you played with as a child. This is just a little bit wet, and so it doesn't hold together quite as much as modeling clay. But this settled out in a very short-lived glacial lake, just as the glaciers were leaving the Nippersink Valley. So this is one of the fun things about looking at soils, because you can see into history. As you go down, you go back in time, and here we can see the evidence for the glacial lake that once covered really all of the Nippersink Valley. And here I'm just talking about the gray colors that signify the wetness of the valley and the wetness of the soil. It's saturated for much of the year, or at least much of the spring and early summer, and that produces these reduced gray colors in the soil, except for a little area here where you'll see just a little fragment. I'll just try to stop it there. That little oxidized area there, that's where a root of a plant growing up above grew down into the soil. And wetland plants have a special capacity for growing, for growing in wetlands where there's no oxygen in the soil. They actually pick up oxygen in the above ground parts of the plant, and then pump it down into their roots to provide oxygen for their roots, that, like every other living thing, needs oxygen to respire and to burn sugars to stay alive. And some of that oxygen leaks out into the soil, essentially rusts the free iron, and creates these little strands of what are called root oxidation models in the soil, a diagnostic feature of wetlands here in the Chicago area. This will be, we're now in a meander bed of Nippersink Creek, much like this diagram would meander there. So the stream is looping around us, and I think the camera here is going to pan around and follow the stream. It loops around us, looking south and then looking north, and actually the stream doubles back again. You can see it headed the other way here. So a really tight series of meanders here. We're going to go down into the soil here. And the reason why I found this so interesting is when you're in a meander bend like this, again, you're looking back in time, because this soil was created within the last few centuries as the meander continued to extend itself, in this case, to the west. And if we look all the way here at the top, what we call the A horizon in the soil, this is the flood deposits. So whenever we have floods in the Nippersink Valley, water, when it comes out of the channel, it slows down, and the silts and clays drop out and create this and then plants grow in this and create this dark colored surface. As we get down into this zone here, I guess, I'll just slow down. I'm a little bit ahead of where I was in the video. So there's the flood deposits on the surface, very silty and clay and organic rich. So we have some native sedges growing in there. The sedges, interestingly, have popped back on their own when we repositioned the Nippersink Creek where it used to be. It seemed like it was all canary grass, and the sedges are actually acting like bullies, and they're starting to push the canary grass out. And so as we go down below those flood deposits, now we're down to a very sandy layer. And this is the old point bar sediments. We saw a point bar in that early video. When we panned to the other side of the stream from where the cut bank was. So this is the point bar. Moving back in time, this was a little bit earlier. This is when this was at the edge of the stream. This is when the stream had already relocated to the west. We're right at the edge of the stream, and all the way when we get down in here, we're into the stream bottom gravels when the stream was right exactly where we're located right here. So you can see that time sequence of sediments. To me, nature is beautiful everywhere you look. I mean, to most people, I guess this isn't as pretty as a goldfinch, but to me, all of nature is beautiful and soil is beautiful. And I just never, it's just mesmerizing to me because of what you can see in the soil, how you can go back in time with it. And the closer you get and get your magnifying glass out and start looking closer and closer, new worlds open up every time you look into the soil. So it's just a wonderful experience. And I hope some of you have come out and take a soil workshop with me one day. So back to stream restoration. This is the Army Corps project, just downstream of where we were. So we were here at that bridge to start with. Now we've gone through this meandering section. This was phase 1 of Nippersink Creek restoration. This is where it was completely ditched to the west and north. Here the stream was never completely taken out of its meanders, but the stream was deeply entrenched with steep cut banks. And so we had long had this on the agenda to do. We had an Army Corps, I've forgotten the number. An application for an Army Corps grant to do this, but it didn't come through until I think about 7 years ago. It was a 5-year project in which they graded back the banks and installed riffles. And now we'll look at some of that stream restoration here in the next few slides. So here is we're in that Army Corps area now. Try to remember that first steep cut bank. Well, that's what all these look like. I mean, I worked around in this area for years before the Army Corps project. And this was a tall cut bank. Believe me, I fell off of it once into the stream. It was a tall cut bank. And see how they graded it back at a very low angle and planted it in native plants. And also you can barely see it in this video, but you can see a little bit of the turbulence there of a riffle. And so the water is coming from this direction and it drops just a couple of inches. These are very subtle riffles here. It drops just a couple of inches. And the purpose of the riffles is to raise the water level. And there are 7 of them. So all together, they raise the water level almost 2 feet. Some of them are a little bit bigger than others. And there are a couple reasons for doing that. One is we hope that by slowing the water down, we'll get some deposition in the channel and begin to build the stream bed up again, just as it was entrenched downward over the last 150 years. And the other more immediate reason is as we raise the water level here, we're raising the water table in the soil around the stream. And that allows the restoration of wetland and wet prairie vegetation, which is impossible if the stream is another 2 feet down. That pulls the water table down, dries out the surface soil. And so the restoration of the valley and the vegetation of the valley is really dependent on the restoration of the stream and raising the water level. Boy, I wish you could hear this one because I did this at the spur of the moment. Jackie was my Jackie Biro is our volunteer coordinator, has worked with me on developing our Tom Talks over the last year plus now, and she's just been an invaluable part of the program and did all the photography here. And yeah, she's never in the show, but she was always in the show in a way. So she asked me a question about why would you restore a stream if you can never really get it back to what it was, and if the landscape around it is so different from what it was before, why even try to restore a stream? I mean, mean, that's a really good question. I mean, why would you try to restore a prairie if you could never really get it back to the prairie it was 500 years ago? I mean, probably the best we can do will never get back to 500 years ago. Why try with an oak savanna? Why try with a prairie fen that's badly degraded if you can never get it back to what it was 500 years ago? I mean, that's sort of like, that's a practical question. So what is your answer to that practical question? Well, but for that, you really need to think long and hard about what the purpose of ecological restoration is. And if the purpose is to erase all of our presence, then we'll never get there. We'll never be able to erase ourselves and get the world back to what it was 500 years ago. But what we can do is to begin to restore aspects of that world. So Nippersink Creek, the creek is a different creek today, and it carries, at least seasonally, much more water than it used to carry, just because the landscape has changed. But we can raise the water table and begin to restore the wetland vegetation around the stream. We can restore wetland vegetation along the edges of the stream by slowing the water down and cleaning up watershed. We can increase native fish and mussel populations in the stream. We can restore prairies. We can get many native prairie plants back into the prairies surrounding Nippersink Creek. We can do the same with savannas. So the question is, I mean, that's what restoration is about. It's not about magically going back to the past, to a time before people were here, but it's about recognizing what we have lost and working hard to begin to restore, one step at a time, what we've lost, and to improve the landscape, to at least get many of those species back and many of the processes back that once really shaped the landscape as it was in the distant past. So to me, that is why we're doing it, and that's the restoration I try to talk to people about. It's not magic. It doesn't, we never get it to a point where the land then restores itself. It just doesn't work that way. We have to work at it, and generations ahead of us will have to work at it also. This is thank you for coming to Glacial Park, and come back again soon, because I'd really love to see you out there. It's not going to be very long before we could actually meet out at the park, where you could come out there and be a part of a weekend of restoration and one of our education programs. Yeah, I really look forward to that. I've been a teacher for 30 years, and I really miss walking in the woods with a group of people, augering up a soil and having them look at it and squeeze it in their fingers. I really miss that, and I hope we can all do that together soon. I'm going to stop sharing now, and we can take some questions.
Well, thank you very much. It was wonderful.
And I am sorry. I'm really sorry for the sound quality. I'll just have to keep working at that. I worked with someone this morning and did a Zoom call with them, and they said they could hear it. So obviously the problems are bigger than that.
Oh, yeah. Well, one question there is, how is Glacial Park adapting to climate changes, or what's your future plans, in other words?
Well, that was the last presentation I did. I did it for the wild ones down in King County. And we talked about the phenology program at Glacial Park, which is about studying the blooming dates of plants, blooming and stop bloom dates of plants, and then looking at changes in weather from year to year, trying to understand how our native plants respond to year changes in weather to get a better idea of how they respond to climate change in the future. I think projects like that are vital, and I hope more people start doing them. We got very lucky because we had a phenology program that had started back in the 1980s. A very wise and talented woman named Joyce Perdix started the program back in the 80s, and for health reasons had to drop out by the late 80s, but left that data for us, and we picked it up in 2012 and started the program back up again. So to make the story short, because I could talk for another hour about the phenology program, but climate change is coming. I think there are, I was asked in an interview with some people at College of Lake County a few months ago about what I thought the two biggest challenges to ecological restoration were in the future. And I said it is climate change, and it is increasing the diversity of people who do conservation, because the demography of the country is changing, and that's critically important to conservation being a popular and well-supported and popularly supported enterprise in 50 or 100 years. That's vital. But back to climate change. Climate change is going to change the world kind of under our feet, and it changes the world that plants live in. And the question is, will our native plants be able to survive? The median temperature increase in this part of the world or for the world in general, is about 5 degrees, median 5 degree Fahrenheit. It will be much higher near the poles, a little bit lower at the equator. And the question is, will we be able to absorb that kind of change and keep our native plants alive and keep native prairies alive and oak savannas alive, the plants in those alive? And so that's the challenge. And I can't tell you the answer to that question. I can tell you that so far, with 11 years of data stretched over the last 25 or so years, I believe that we can keep our native plants and the genetic sources of this area alive going into the future. That's not a certainty. And we certainly need to make plans if it doesn't work out that way. But I think for right now, I think it's a bit premature to be moving seed sources north from central Illinois. I think we could do that later. Doing that now is getting a little bit ahead of the game. We need to know a lot more about our native plants and how they're responding. And another 10 years and we'll know a lot more. And if we get other people doing this phenology work, frankly, on insects and birds, and understanding how they are responding to temperature changes, we can have a more educated way of looking at the future and saying, well, what do we need to do? Do we need to ship our native plants north, or will they be able to survive here? That's a very important question. And it's one we can't answer yet, but it's something we need to answer soon.
Okay, thank you. Another question, please clarify, the museum is now open to the public, and I found that out. It's open 7 days a week, I believe. And but you can elaborate on that. Any hint about what special exhibit is about?
There's always a theme to the exhibit, and I don't. But the neat thing about it, I used to, back in the early 2000s, I was doing all of our exhibits in the old field station. They were made of cardboard and paper and pictures and rocks I would bring up from the basement, and I was proud of some of those. But about probably around 5 or 6 years ago, we had the promise of a grant from the state, some serious money, to develop a really nice permanent exhibit structure there. And unfortunately, after we had engaged a consultant to do that, the grant was pulled. But with a change in administration at the state level, the grant was reinstated, and we have finished that exhibit. So it's just a beautiful space to go into. The sort of sub theme of the exhibit will change from time to time, but it's always be fun to look at it. And plus, when you're in the exhibit room, if you look to the west, you can see all the way across the Nippersink Valley. It's just one of the more spectacular views in the park from the visitor center. So that's a must visit if you go to the park.
And you have bird feeders out there.
Yes.
Look at.
And we usually have the sound of the birds piped into the exhibit area also.
Yeah. Okay. Other question was, can you mention some of the birds you might be likely to see at the park?
Well, some of you birders who go there are probably better than I am. I mean, most of my bird surveys have been grassland surveys and not in Glacial Park lately. Yeah, I will see. I will tell you the birds that I always look forward to hearing every year in the vicinity of the visitor center: the Baltimore Orioles and the blue-gray gnatcatchers, which for some reason, it's one of the first bird calls I recognized years ago after listening to breeding birds, the Chicago area tapes all winter long in my cars. I went back and forth to work. I thought I had learned nothing, and then I suddenly heard a sound, and the name blue-gray gnatcatcher came to my mind. So I always had a soft spot for that one. Towhees, they have a couple of places in the park that always seem to be towhee central every single year. I can't see any difference in the oak woods, but they're always there. I've seen scarlet tanagers. Of course, blue jays are all over the park. You get around the edges of yellow warblers and anywhere that's, near wetlands, the common yellow throats. If you get out into the more hayfield areas, the bobolinks really put on a show in the springtime, and meadowlarks. The old prairie where you have that. It's a few years since the fire and you get a lot of thatch. The Henslow sparrows are usually pretty easy to hear out there, although I'll hear them in other parts of the park also. I'm starting to run out of gas. Bluebirds, of course, are commonly seen out in the open, and tree swallows. But yeah, I think I've just about run out of gas on my bird list.
Well, I know we've talked about doing one of our bird walks out there, and because we found out some of the birds leave Lake County.
Well, they do, huh? They actually go all the way to McHenry. Huh?
Yeah. I have a question. I don't see why I'm doing this. Maybe some more people have questions to put on here, but the program that was every year and had to close down, a kind of a fundraiser activity with the encampment. Do you think that will be coming back?
Trail of History, that one ran for 25 years. Now, as far as I know, it won't be coming back. We've the valley where it used to be we've taken the drainage tiles out of it, so that area has been reflooded. We do a sugar maple festival, each year. That was the call of the administration. There's certainly a lot of people that miss that. I missed it. There's always a lot of camaraderie of the staff. It was all hands on deck for the week before that and the week after that, putting it together and taking it in the park. But I don't expect the Trail of History will come back. It's a wonderful event, a lot of good memories, but I don't think it's coming back.
Okay. Well, let's see. Do anybody have any further questions? It looks like you may have. Well, let's see. Are there bird walks? I noticed that I met Donna, who was on the board of McHenry County Audubon, and are there set up bird walks specifically there?
Well, we have, McHenry Audubon does bird walks all over the county, and I'm sure the Southern Glacial Park. Dave Miller, one of our birder aficionado volunteers, does regular walks in Glacial Park all summer long. I don't have those dates with me right now, but that was something that he was. And that was just anyone and everyone could show up for those bird walks. So yeah, there are bird walks in Glacial Park.
Mm-hmm. What's the largest mammal size man that you've seen in the park?
Well, a mammal, I guess that would be a white-tailed deer. We do have of course, lots of coyotes. We have badger in the park. They've really been documented in the park since I came to work there in 2003. Now it's not that uncommon to see really large badger holes in the park. So those have come back. Sandhill cranes have gone from one nesting pair. Now they're just all over the park in the springtime. Yeah, well, we had a mountain lion, that mountain lion that ended up on the north side of Chicago and got shot in someone's garage, was rumored to have been come through Glacial Park. And some people say they saw it there. I didn't. But of course, that was a freak occurrence. Yeah, I think that I don't think we have any abominable snowmen or yetis there, but or gorillas or lions or tigers or bears. Yeah, but we might. So.
All right. Well, I think I don't. Oh wait, here we go. It says, "Do you need or want beavers?"
Oh, we have lots of beaver in the park. They're all over the park now. If you listen to the Nippersink Creek Tom Talk, I talk a lot about beavers. I think they were essential to the way streams functioned in the distant past. They were really what we think of as streams today are linear features and water flows in a winding path. But I think there's a lot of evidence that streams were a series of beaver ponds in the past with small sections of stream connecting them, and that was one of the reasons why streams, why they became so deeply entrenched after European settlement, when all the beaver were trapped out. Actually, before settlement, the beaver were gone by the time European settlers got here. They were trapped out as the fur trade went through. And so the streams became very different. They became linear features and they rapidly eroded down into the landscape, particularly after settlement and the starting to drain the farm fields and then establishing tile drains by the end of mid late 19th century. But beaver were essential to the ecology of aquatic systems in northern Illinois, and I think I hope this is what I hope. I hope that in 50 years, long after I'm dead, that there will be a series of beaver ponds along Nippersink Creek. I think we have a ways to go as a society to allow beaver to do that, because we like the linear streams of water that we can take a canoe down or a kayak. And a series of beaver ponds isn't not nearly as easy for recreation. So maybe we'll be able to do that in some streams and not others. But beaver are all over Glacial Park today, but they're not allowed to dam up Nippersink Creek anymore.
Okay. Well, you know, this is a good place to see, because it changes what some of our Illinois people think to be called flatlanders. People up in